Hi there, Kris here with another quick tip for y'all. In this video, we're going to talk about thinning our paints and the various ways we can thin, basically the way the paint acts when we thin it down with whatever medium we happen to be using. So here is two examples of medium that are fairly common to us painters. The third most common, and probably the first one that everybody uses, is water, but obviously I don't think I need to show that, as I think we're all very familiar with what water is. So here we have on the left is the Citadel's Vallejos Medium. Vallejos Medium? I can't remember what the name is. It's this is from the heavy metal set, but it's the same stuff. And then we also have some Vallejo thinner medium as well. This is just the stuff that comes in the smaller bottle, and it's a little eyedropper. Now the plus and minuses of either two of these is the fact that this one here is in a little pot, and so you have to use your brush to get the medium out, versus this guy who's in an eyedropper, and he is easier to get at because, well, you just simply drop it onto the palette and away you go. There's no need to try and guess how much you're putting onto your palette, as it's a tiny little drop each time you just apply a little bit of pressure to your bottle. This one is actually a lot better when you want to thin your paints, versus this one where you have to kind of, guess how much medium you need, and it's all up to, your own personal preference how much you use. And actually this one is kind of like when you use water, because you're using the brush to apply your water, unless of course you have an eyedropper with water in it, and you're using that method to thin your paints, which is all good and just the same anyway. So let's have a look at these two mediums and thinning them down. To get us started, I'm going to be using some Mephiston Red, just because I like the color. It's nice and rich, and it's lots of fun to use. Slap a little bit down onto our palette. Now that was just roughly one droplet of paint. So the first one we'll look at right now is water. Typically, whenever I thin my paint down, I usually dunk the brush in so that the bristles are just a little swollen. This is a fairly heavy load of water onto the brush. Now often you'll get some water that will build up onto the furrow, and that's fine too, but often what can end up happening is the force of this will force more water downwards, and so it can kind of throw off what you're mixing. And whenever I mix, I tend to start off the color and then build into the paint and thin it down, and then get to the consistency in which I'm looking for. Now when you're thinning your paints down, obviously you want to be able to retain that low viscosity of the paint, so that you can maintain control and doodle away with it, as it were, as you can see here. When you have too much water, you are turning it more into a wash-like consistency, but sometimes that's what you want. So say, for example, we double the amount of water here, and we apply it to the paint, and as you can see now, there's like no viscosity left to the paint, and it's running freely all over the place. But now it's behaving more like a wash, and so now when it's in this consistency, we can use it to tint a surface. As you can see, it's very broad, whereas this one is so much more controlled, and you can deliberately put the color down and you can build your color up, versus this one where it's really, really thin and it kind of goes everywhere. And see how when you lift the brush, you can see how there's little dollops of it that want to just kind of go anywhere where they want to go, and just there's no control. Whereas when you have the paint in a fairly thin state, you can deliberately control, and it's not going to spread out anywhere. And well, this one is because the water's right there, but and you can see how it runs like that when you versus. And then of course when it's unthinned, it's just really just tons of control. You can see how we just. And so now let's take a look at using the heavy metal medium. So let's get rid of that guy. Let's have this guy out. You don't really need to shake this around too much whenever you're using it. Grab a little bit more fresh paint, and also make sure that we don't have too much water in our bristles from rinsing it off. And so we're just going to lay a little bit more paint down. And so as I mentioned before, it's not very accurate as to how much medium you're drawing off from your pot, as you kind of just have to eyeball it really. And you can see here how the bristles are swollen, just like we had done with the water. So this is a fairly heavy load of thinner into our bristles. And again, same with the water, I will start off from the color and build in, go to a consistency that I'm looking for. Now again, when you're looking for consistency, it's really personal preference in what you're doing. And there really is no right or wrong way to use your colors other than just leaving them sitting out and, you know, mistreating them. And so as you can see, we just used the medium, and right now it's down to a fairly thin consistency, and I can do pretty much whatever I like with it. And again, and same with the water, we can thin this down to like a wash consistency as well. And so you can see how we can use a lot of medium. Now the benefit of using medium instead of water to this effect is that the water or the medium will always be the same consistency versus the water. Sometimes you have hard water, you know, impurities in your water, whatever. If you're using you're rinsing water, there's all sorts of variables that come into play when you're using just water versus medium. Now again, the medium, you can have bad batches of medium and such, but it's not really often the case. And so again, you can see how we can use this just to tint, and how easy it is to play with in this state. And even when it is in this really thin state, it's still fairly controllable. You can see here, I'm just, again, doing this little dot test kind of thing, versus when it's loaded up with a medium again, you know, you can see how, and again, when you're using medium, you're breaking down that color, the pigment, and when you're thinning your paints, I should say, you are breaking down that pigment, and the color is not as vibrant, as you can see there, and also here. Let's take a look at Vallejos Medium. And so again, we're going to grab a little more of our Mephiston red and slap a little bit of him onto the palette. Now again, the benefit of this guy is that it's a dropper style, so we don't even have to worry about our brush or anything like that to try, and we do have to be mindful of our ratios of paint. Kind of like before, you can drop it right into the paint, or you can drop it off to the side and mix on the side, as typically I do. Now in a lot of videos you'll see I just throw it right onto the paint, because often I'm just going for a 1-to-1 mixture. 1-to-1 mixture will take it so that it is down to this kind of workable kind of consistency. But again, it's all personal preference. This medium does look like it's milky, but when it dries just fine. So you can see here it was roughly a 1-to-1, and again the paint flows, that's a little too thin, but, and you can see the paint just flows ever so nicely. You can do whatever you like. You can see how it's still very manageable. And again, because it's in a dropper style, if we need a little bit more, then you just drop another drop, and you thin it down more. And like I said before, it does have that murky look, that milky look. When it dries, it doesn't have that. And also too, this is Vallejo and Games Workshop stuff, so it might explode, I don't know. I'm just joking. And so you can see again, when you thin it down, you can take it down to a wash-like consistency, thin it right down, so it's mostly medium. And again, like I said, the medium will dry, it'll dry clear once it dries. It just, the way it looks to the eye right now, it has a kind of a pinkish hue, but that's nothing to worry about. It will dry in a red fashion. As you can see, this has already turned back to the same values here. And that's roughly thinning down your paints. Oftentimes it comes down to personal preference, how you thin your paint down, how you want to work with your paints, and particularly what you're doing. When we're base coating, often I'll work with the paint in a 1-to-1 fashion of paint to medium, just because it is more manageable, it's thinner, and it flows into the details a lot better. Often whenever you're working straight off the pot, like straight into the palette, and you know, you're not using any mediums to thin the paint down, often the paint is just a little too heavy and you can obscure details, and it just becomes a huge pain, versus thinning your paints down and applying more than 1 or 2 layers of paint in thin succession. And it also, when you alternate your brush strokes, but I don't think I have to go into that right now, do I? So when working with your mediums, you're looking for control and effect. The effect being, when you thin it down, you're doing like light glazing. You can thin it down and do your 2-brush blending if you want, because you just, you know, you thin the paint down just a nice, quick, workable consistency. It's really up to you how you thin it down, but I do recommend that everybody, you know, get into the habit of thinning their paints, even when they're just base coating, just to get used to thinning your paint down just a little bit, and try and start with a 1-to-1. So when you're painting right from the pots, like in the Citadel stuff here, you just take one little dollop of paint, one little thing of medium, or little thing of water, and you thin the paint down. In a nutshell, this is thinning down your paints. It's not terribly complex, although I do recommend that a lot of new painters get used to thinning down the paints when you're doing your base coating. And so hopefully you found that quick tip video informative and useful. For the next quick tip video, leave a comment below, or if somebody beats you to it, give that comment a thumbs up. And we'll see you in the next video. Happy wargaming.